Your hands together for Graham Callis.
I wasn't willing to shave my head to go full Billy Corgan. Just wasn't going to do that, but I'm close. A few more years, maybe. So this is I want to just say a couple things real quick before I get into my story. This is my first instance of putting myself out there creatively in any kind of medium. So please be kind. Second is that today is my daughter's 8th-year-old birthday. And she is a very creative and kind, bright person in my life, and I just want to dedicate this instance of me putting myself out there to her. So I watched in horror as my son opened up his birthday present from my dad on his 5th birthday. It was a Nerf gun, and it also came along with a pack of Nerf darts and a tactical vest, which had a spot for each of the Nerf darts and a place for the Nerf gun to go. Now, the reason that this horrified me was because I was now a father. Before I became a father, the world was a very violent and scary place. Now that I was a father, it's still a very scary and violent place. But now I have to raise 2 small kids in this very scary and violent place. And my way to go about doing that was to try and remove all elements of violence from their lives. I wanted to shelter them. I wanted to not let them play with guns. I wanted to not let them play war. So that was going to be my strategy to try and shelter them. So leading up to this birthday, I was feeling more and more pressure by my son to actually let him play war. We were going outside, and he was picking up any little stick, and it was becoming a sword, or it was becoming a pistol. There was a curtain rod that I had thrown away 4 times, and he kept getting it out of the garbage, and it was a rifle. And there was nothing I could do about it. I picked him up from daycare one day. His teachers came up to me and they said, today in craft time, your son made a gun with popsicle sticks and cotton balls. He walked around saying that it was a rocket ship, but he was holding it like a gun, and he was pointing it at the other kids in class, and he was going bang, bang, bang. We had to tell him to stop that. So we had a talk about that, my son and I. Just this increasing pressure and I don't know where he was getting it, but he really wanted to play war. He wanted to play with guns. So as he's opening this gift, I'm racing these ideas through my mind. How am I going to keep this away from him? How am I going to restrict his play with this toy that I did not want him to initially have? But by the time I had any kind of solution in my head, he had already had the tactical vest on. He had all the Nerf darts in all of the places, all facing the same way, so he could quickly grab them, throw them into the gun. He had the gun in his pocket. He was outside in the front yard fighting whatever imaginary evil was besieging our house at that moment. I'm watching him out there, and I'm trying to reason through this, and I thought back to my childhood and when I was a kid, and the games that I used to play when I was young. I grew up, most of my childhood, I grew up in the 80s in a medium-sized city, in a great neighborhood where many of the kids in that neighborhood were very close to me in age. I was very fortunate for that. And one of the games that we would typically play, in fact, we more than typically, we played it a lot, was guns. We played guns. In some neighborhoods, the kids called it war. In other neighborhoods, the kids may have called it soldier. If you commercialized your game of war and you called it G.I. Joe, that was their thing. We played guns. So a Saturday morning was typically involved cartoons in the morning. Your cartoons ended at about noon when all of the adult programs came on. We didn't want to watch any of those. And then we all went outside. We divvied up the weapons. We divvied up teams. We argued over who was going to get the best guns, and then we wreaked havoc across the neighborhood with total disregard for anybody's property, We climbed over fences. We played in other people's garages. You would go through our neighborhood in the afternoon, and you would hear, bang, 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 you're dead. I got you first. No, I didn't. You didn't get me. I got you first. No, you didn't get me. You didn't even have your gun out of your pocket. How could you possibly shoot me? Somebody driving through our neighborhood would typically see one or two kids standing along the side of the road, kind of looking downtrodden, holding the gun often in their hand, and they were counting. They were counting to 30 because the rule was when you got shot, you had to stay in place and count to 30, and then you could get back into the game. We would do this countless number of Saturdays. It was our favorite activity to do. And then one day, my father came home with something that changed the whole landscape of our game of guns. Somewhere, he had found a giant toy bazooka. It was magnificent. It came up to my chest. It was black. It had this red handle, and you could pump up this air chamber inside of it. And when you pulled the trigger, it made this fantastic boom. It was great. I wanted to introduce this new fake weapon into our game under my terms and in the most dramatic way possible. So we assembled like we did Saturday around noon. We assembled like we typically did. We divvied up the guns that were there. We split into teams, and we started moving across the neighborhood. And then I mounted my campaign to subtly entice the enemy team into our base, which was my garage. Subtly entice them into our base so I could get them all into one location. And by subtle, I mean I ran around the neighborhood and I yelled out, "Hey, my team, we're going to meet in our base in 5 minutes. Everybody go to our base in 5 minutes. Come on, my team, we're going to our base." That's what I did to entice the other team. I had told my team to hide off somewhere, and I hid so that I could see my garage and I could watch when the other team went inside so that I could have my moment. Sure enough, they came by. They went in through the door into the garage. I had hid the bazooka. I had it all pumped up. I could not possibly put one more pump of air into that chamber. And I grabbed it. I walked up to the garage. I turned the knob. I opened it just a little bit. I put the bazooka on my shoulder, and I kicked open the door. And in what was my own say hello to my little friend moment, I shouted into the garage, "All of you inside of this garage are now dead." And I pulled the trigger. This enormous boom went off. And in my little kid head, in my pretend little kid head, my garage exploded into a million splinters. There was shrapnel everywhere. Bodies went flying. It was fantastic. A glorious moment of pretend war. That was all in my head. Now, in reality, what happened was all of the friends that were in the garage turned and looked at me shocked. One of them said, "That's not fair. You can't do that." And then they all just counted to 30, and then they were back in the game. So a couple of things happened at that moment when I pulled that trigger. One is that I realized that I should never fire this thing while it's on my shoulder again, because it was really loud and my ear rang for about 5 minutes. The other thing that this did was it started a bit of a nuclear escalation in our game of guns. From that point forward, which included things like strapping toy Uzis to our BMX bikes and big wheels, and engaging in vehicular warfare with each other. Also, taking handfuls of crab apples and throwing them as these little tiny bombs at each other. A soccer ball was considered the big one, which could be rolled into another team's base and destroy the entire building, killing the entire team. And then this all came to an abrupt halt when one of my friends took a pine cone grenade to the eye. His mother was not very happy about that, and so we kind of ended the escalation at that point. So I thought about the games that I had played when I was a kid, playing guns as often as I did, and I started to think about it, and I thought, I turned out okay. And none of you in here really know me, so I can say that and not have to worry about it too much. And as far as I know, only one of my friends that played guns with us posts pictures of his assault rifle that's sitting on his patio table on his Facebook page. So for the most part, to my knowledge, we all turned out okay. My father trusted me to know the difference between pretend violence and real violence. And so I decided at that moment to do the same for my son and to let him, and to trust that he was going to understand the difference between pretend violence and real violence. And that when my kids are exposed to the real violence that is out there in this world, because they will be, it's going to happen at some point, that as their father, I will be there to help them comprehend and to understand it. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham.